The live stream is preparing. Redirecting to YouTube. Okay, you are live on YouTube, but you're not live on the site yet, so I'm just gonna copy it over there for you. Okay, Jody, you are live.
Yeah! Hello, everybody. Welcome. She is May 1st, and you have found yourself in the workshop series that we've decided to put on for about once a month around mental health issues that I would love to make much more accessible for this community. And I just have to tell you, so my name is Dr. Jody Carrington. If you just don't know why you're here, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I talk a lot about relationships and connect. Got it. I talk a lot about relationships and connection and trauma and just how this whole business of staying connected to each other just becomes difficult, and boundaries are the quintessential piece of that stuff. So I'm so excited about this workshop because I have to tell you, I learned a lot in this process of sort of navigating what I wanted to talk to you about tonight, and what I really want to make sure that we talk about a little bit differently around this sort of issue of boundaries. And so, two things before we get started. I'm coming to you live, although many of you get to rewatch this, or all of you get to rewatch this for 7 days after today, if you can't join us tonight. But I can see all of your comments as well. We're watching those. So you just need to refresh your screen. Otherwise, you'll see some of the previous places that we did, or the previous workshops. It'll look like you're in those, but you're really not. So just refresh and jump right back in. And tonight we are coming to you live from Treaty 7 land, Treaty 7 territory, which is home of the Blackfoot Confederacy. It includes made up of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and the Métis Nation Region 3. It is my honor every single day to reflect on the fact that it is my privilege to raise my babies here, that so much sacrifice was made. And it is probably one of the places that I've learned the most about boundaries and what I will accept and stand for and what I won't these days. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about that tonight. And you can see there is a chat, and there's also a resource section that comes with this ticket tonight that I put some of my notes into and some things that I'd love you to check out later if you're interested. And then I can see questions. I've got a bunch of questions here that we've got already sent in, but Marty's monitoring the chat, as is Des. And so we're all excited that you're here. And I cannot wait to tell you all these exciting things that are going to happen tonight. Okay, so let's start. I have a little bit of a conversation around boundaries, why they're important. And I just want to give a bit of a preface around the fact that, first of all, I'm not a fan of boundaries. And when I think about this so listen, let me just clarify that. I'm not a fan of understanding and setting boundaries the way that I've always thought them to be true. Okay. Because for me, the word boundaries feels very much like the antithesis of everything I've ever known to be true, which is we were never meant to do any of this alone. People are so disconnected these days that they need us. They need each other. And when people are in crisis, like, you don't run. I'm a helper. I'm a psychologist by training. And when shit goes south, that's where I get my identity. Like, put me in, coach. I will navigate this situation. And so many times I think even those of us who are parents or, work in any human services professions really get in this place of like, I got it, right? And the first thing out of the gate is I really want to not confuse the importance of boundaries with just what it means to be or who you are as a person. You can still be a helper and give relentlessly and do all of the things and be who you are inherently. You will just do them so much better when you really truly understand this concept of boundaries. So there's that. Now, the other thing that I really want to talk about, tonight is I think the fact that, when I think about the word boundary, I think about things like get off my lawn. Okay. And I might use some strong language tonight too. So if you have babies, put your earbuds in. Sometimes I just swear to the blue and I don't even know. I don't have a lot of boundaries around swearing. And I'll explain why that is in a moment. Anyway, so the other thing is that, it's really like, my impression is always, people who are relentlessly steadfast in their boundaries, there's a big difference between having them and communicating. Okay, so those are the two things that I think I want to talk to you a lot about tonight. And secondly, or thirdly, or whatever number we're on, I want to start with so what is it? What is a boundary? Because what's all the buzz? Everybody says all the time, she's got good boundaries. He doesn't have good boundaries. What are your boundaries? Can your boundaries change? And I think it's just the expectation around, boundaries are typically, in my experience anyway, synonymous with this idea that you're an asshole. And that is the farthest thing from the truth. So let's take a look at, what I think to be true about this idea of, really just what a boundary is. Okay. So I'm sharing you this little piece first. And most of this is already in your package. And so you can see these, but I just wanted you to take a look at the screen when we started for tonight so that we can all start on the same page. Okay. So boundaries, and I really wanted to clarify this idea of healthy boundaries, are the structures or edges you place around almost anything. Okay. It's like in this lifetime, when you want to figure out where your edges are for things that you believe or think, or relationships you have, or commodities that you have access to. So healthy boundaries are structures or edges you place around your time. You can have boundaries around emotions. You can have boundaries around your body and mental health. The intention behind a healthy boundary is for you to stay resilient, solid, and content with who you are. Okay. So oftentimes when we think about boundaries, this is the first sort of myth that I really want to debunk right out of the gate. Boundaries are not for anybody else other than you. Okay. I think this is the biggest mistake because we use boundaries as teachable moments for other people. So not what a boundary is. A boundary is, I want you to think about you inside this holy sacred space that you create for yourself. Okay. The people are in there that really matter to you. The thoughts, the moral standards, the beliefs, the things that you know to be true to your soul are really, really critically important to you. And that's like nirvana. That's like the safest place within these things. Okay. Boundaries are sort of what you set to keep that place sacred for you. Okay. They're mostly for you, not them. Here's one of the issues that we often think about for boundaries. We use them as ultimatums. This is my boundary. And if you cross it, then you're dead to me. You're the problem. I'm pissed off at you. Or we use boundaries in an effort to try to teach people lessons, right? I will not allow smoking in my house. You smoke in my house? Oh, my hope was that you would stop smoking because I don't want that for you, right? That's not, you are using that as an ultimatum, trying to use that as a teachable moment. Do you understand the difference? I don't know if you, what is so critically important to me is, Marty just told me I have food in my teeth. Really? Jesus. Just a minute. This is very important. Des, you might have to take this part out. Oh my God, I do. It's lipstick. Sorry. One of the very important boundaries of working hard here is that you can't show up with food in your teeth. Right, Marty? Okay. That's so much better now. Okay. Now, I'm just trying to see if I can see the chat. what I think is really sort of critically important about this process too is healthy boundaries are like what you won't, it's all for you. The edges you place around your time. Now, here's the interesting thing about when you know a little bit more about what you stand for and what you don't, okay? Because this actually isn't about anybody else other than you. And I think that the other thing that I really want to make clear tonight is boundaries are a prerequisite for empathy, okay? When you know what you stand for, when you know what matters to you, you take so much emotion out of the game because you're regulated. And you then get to pick and choose how other people respond to your boundaries. When you are clear about them, it changes everything. Okay. So I want to just be clear about this process one more time. Boundaries are for you. Okay. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in always is that we want to, in an effort to manage people around us, manage experiences around us, we try to set up our boundaries in an effort to hope that other people will respect them. Okay. Other people's response to your boundaries, we have no control over that. It is why being very clear about why and when and how you set a boundary becomes so critically important. Why is this the hill you want to die on? Why is that important to you? And if it was previously important to you, is it still important to you? If you have some non-negotiables, how did you arrive there? What's your story about that? How do we sort of check in that way? And I think this understanding of sort of just what it means to understand where your edges are, what you can stand, what you can't stand, what you can tolerate, what you don't tolerate, really then gives you so much direction on what you do next, which is sort of when do you enforce those and how do you enforce those things? Okay. So again, I wanted to see your whole face, but let's go back to sharing this part. Okay. So there's structures or edges you place around your time, your emotions, your body, your mental health. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about, sometimes boundaries are very clear. Let me give you an example of some boundaries, right? 6 o'clock is sacred for me. I need to be home with my family, right? When my own personal space, boundaries around your body, boundaries around who can touch your body. If you, for example, a pregnant woman, what is very clear to you around, who gets to touch your belly, your hair. Oftentimes, there's lots of conversation around, the personal space that we contain or control. How do I keep boundaries around my time so that I have more to give to other people? And the entire purpose around this, right, is that you, more than anybody, will have to figure out where your edges are. Isn't that tricky? You have to figure out where your edges are. What does it feel like when somebody pushes the limit too far? What does it feel like when you can't uphold your boundary? And I like to think about boundaries as so critically important, but they can be movable. Okay. You are so in control of your own boundaries. Who only gets to move them, however, is you. Okay. Because mostly they're about you, and it allows other people to sort of know where they stand with you. Okay. So I think that a couple of times, when we have talked a lot about this stuff, on stages, when I'm talking about workplaces or when I'm talking about family systems, when I'm talking about, setting responsibility or, sort of expectations with partners, with people, I think it is really a prerequisite for empathy. And the purpose is clear. If you're not okay, the people you love, lead, teach, coach, get in a relationship with, mentor, grow old with, like, they don't stand much of a chance, right? I have never been so clear that in this time of like so many changing roles, what it means to be able to sort of be clear about this, right? You are the number one. And so many questions came in about, how do I not feel guilty about this? How do I not hurt people when I want to set my boundaries? Okay. Listen, what matters the most in my life is thinking about, and this is never an end game. Okay. is creating that sacred space within those walls. Where do you optimally function? Where do you optimally show up for your kids, your work, your partner, your people? There is a prerequisite a little bit in this boundary conversation about really what you want and what you need. Okay. And Christine, I see this beautiful question, come up there about how do you figure out your own boundaries? So I think the first stop for all of us, right, is to have some conversations, either with a therapist or a friend or in a journal, around some of the things that I want to have some expectations around for me that allows me to function optimally. What do I need for sleep? What do I need to put into my body? Who do I want to surround myself with? What will I tolerate in terms of social and political issues? What rooms do I want to be in? You get a choice to sit at those tables. And where are you healthiest? Where do you show up the best? And I almost like a little bit of a visual exercise when I would think about, doing this work with a client. And I would say, something like, give me the optimal. So if I were to think about, so many of the things that we sort of said, where are your edges around your time, your emotions, your body, and your mental health to stay resilient? If I'm in a resilient place, I know that, for example, I have set some limits around how much time I will spend doing this job. That, I don't book a client after 5 o'clock in the evening, if that's possible. And, when I'm working, how do we make sure when I'm speaking, how do we make sure that we're getting enough rest? If I look in this place, I am so much better when I get the opportunity to do that, when I get the opportunity to say no, when I get the opportunity to, I have to be home with my kids for supper. This is like a non-negotiable for me. This is what I really love to do. I need to know some of those things for me, right? How much do I tolerate conversations in certain situations when I'm with certain people in my life? Do I put myself in rooms where people are swearing? If swearing is a non-negotiable for me, why is that the case? Why is this really important to me? And if I can answer those questions, it'll make it so much easier to uphold a boundary. So such a great question about how do you figure out, what your boundaries are. It's so much about a feeling. Where do you function optimally, right? And there'll be some times where you do have to engage with exes or parents or, those kind of things. And if that becomes unsafe, then, we set other boundaries where oftentimes, in divorce relationships, there is that place of, we pick up and drop off children with a third party, we have a mediator. Like all of those things are examples of when boundaries could not be respected, and we set them up to sort of protect ourselves, okay, to the best of our ability. And I think that, when we think about sort of what the purpose is of those boundaries is because I want to show up better for myself in this process at the end of the day, inside that sacred space. Then I get to figure out, how I navigate, and when those boundaries are breached, or when I have to step outside the things that sort of hurt my soul, then what do I do about that? Now, again, I think what's really critical about this is that boundaries are a prerequisite for empathy. And here's the thing about this, right? The most compassionate amongst us are the most boundaried. Does that not feel like the most ridiculous statement on the planet? Okay. Now, here's the definition of, I'm going to take the definition of compassionate. I'm going to take the definition of empathy. Okay. So both of those are a little bit, empathy, I think, is the ultimate. Empathy is your ability to temporarily suspend judgment and step into the story of another. Okay. It doesn't mean you condone, support, believe. Particularly, it is hardest to do this when you've been hurt by that person. It's hardest to do this when you completely and utterly disagree with a statement or a perception. Empathy, the coolest thing about empathy is that you are not condoning any of their behavior. You are simply trying to get a perspective. Okay. Now, boundaries allow you to have a sense of who you are, where you stand, and it makes it safe enough to step into the shoes of another. When somebody completely is against the way that I see the world, when somebody is completely obliterated or been very unkind to me, or some kid has told me to fuck off, or, somebody has let me down. When I know what is so critically important to me, what I know what I will stand and not stand for, it allows me to stay regulated. And in this place of emotional regulation, I have access to the best parts of me, which is often where empathy lives. Okay. And if I were to think about just a quick definition of emotional regulation is how to stay calm in times of distress. You have access to the best parts of yourself when you are emotionally regulated. It is also the place where we will establish where our boundaries are. Okay. So up next, thank you for some of those questions, is really this question of what is the cost of not having boundaries? Okay. So why should I have a boundary? This list that I've created for you today is also I created for myself. Okay. Because there's a couple of things that happen. There's twofold here. This tells me when I need a boundary. If any of these things start to happen, this tells me that I need a boundary. I'm in a situation where I've let my boundary slip. I haven't paid enough attention to whether I need boundaries or not. And and I think also, the grace around this is that you can be so steadfastly clear in a boundary and still fucking blow it out of the water. Okay. I want to revisit this list sometimes when I'm wondering, why am I so exhausted? Why am I struggling with this person? Why, what do I feel about this place? So let's take a look at some of the costs of boundarylessness. I just made up this. And also then knowing when you need them. The number one tell to when you know that you are a little weak in a particular boundary department is when you are resentful. Resentment is your biggest tell, okay? And now, not that you're not going to go through this life and not resent certain shit that you have to do, right? That, you have to, I don't know, get up with your kids at 6 a.m., or when you have to, like, I'm talking about when you sort of commit to things, say yes to things, date certain people, want to be in relationships with other people. You need to know exactly in a place about, some of these places. So resentment is an example I give all the time. I, as a child psychologist, would always want to help. Okay. And so when I was single and I didn't have any kids and I was early in my career, the expectation was I worked long hours. I had to learn parts of this craft and I had to, spend some extra time writing reports, doing all those kind of things. But there was this real thing in my head that was like, I don't really have any boundaries. That's what makes me so great is that I'll show up anytime, any place for anybody. Right. I thought that was the deal, that if anybody had a problem, they could call me. And that was sort of the place in our family. Just call Jody, she'll figure it out. If Aaron or the kids were struggling, I'll do it. Give it to me. Okay. Because first of all, I thought that I could do it better than most people, truthfully. And also the story in my head was so much that many times I am competent, right? I actually can do things well, or the kids do respond better when it's, mom takes over when they're sick, or, in fact, this is how I like to show, whatever the deal is, we try to get into this place. I'm not interested so much in what you think about, whether you're needed or not in this situation. In any of these situations, I want you to think about how you feel after you commit to something. Okay. Because that's usually the biggest indicator about whether somebody has pushed a boundary for you or you've crossed a boundary, right? If you sort of think in your head, I don't want to date anybody who smokes, and you go on a date with somebody and you're very clear on this, right? You have some of your reasons for this, right? Is that like you hate the way it smells. That it's really harmful for the body. You, in your family system, lost 2 people to lung cancer. And this just isn't something that you'll be able to tolerate. So you go on this date with somebody and they seem really nice and funny, but oof, they smoke. Okay. So that was like a huge boundary for me, but like, I think I'm just going to go through it. Okay. And so before you know it, right, you start to resent it. right? This is something that you knew was really important to you, right? And when we let things slide, the resentment is the number one thing that starts to indicate to me. Number two, secondly, I'll give an example. When I would say, I don't see patients on Sunday nights. And in the beginning of my career, when I was trying to build my private practice, it was like I knew I needed to do this. I didn't resent it one bit because we didn't have children. I was like, yep, I have 2 Sunday nights appointments. I have a Saturday appointment, and I know it's easiest, to sort of build a practice when I'm working in the afternoons. And so this was the plan, no problem. Once we had the children and all of these things started to happen, then I was so mad at having to come to work on a Sunday night. I wanted to spend time with the kids. I wanted to do these things. And it was up to me to be able to set the boundaries. And so somebody would say, listen, the only time I can come now is 6 o'clock on a Sunday. I'm sorry. Otherwise, I won't be able to see you this week. And the first time I had to say, I'm so sorry. Sunday nights are a bit of a sacred time for me. And I have 2 appointments open this week, Monday morning at 9, Wednesday afternoon at 4. And I would be so happy to see you. Now, if I said yes to the Sunday night at 7, guess who I come into that session? I show up at 6:59 and I'm sort of like, hey, thank you for coming. What's up? There is a resentment in the way that I communicate. Now, I allowed this to happen. This person does not deserve that, right? They asked for something, I complied, and I didn't pay enough attention to me about what that meant in terms of my boundaries, okay? When I set those boundaries and they're like, oh, this is brutal, right? The hardest part about it is like, you used to be able to do this for everybody. Why don't you do this anymore? Right? Oh, you're getting too big for your britches. Oh, you're such a big shooter now. You don't see people on Sunday. Gets to the core of everything I believe to be true, right? Am I serving people, reconnecting? I'm on a reconnection revolution. Oh my God, why am I not showing up for people? I get back to my place of, if I want to serve this human well, if I want to have access to empathy and kindness and connection, I need to hold on to these boundaries. And I need to be able to say, listen, I hear you. I wish that I could make these things work a little bit better. These are the 2 appointments I have for this week, and I would love to see you. Fine, I'll take Wednesday at 4. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you. Now, when I show up Wednesday at 4, I am ready. In fact, I'm there at 3:30. I've prepped for the session. I'm very grateful that I've had a day with my family, that I'm rested, that I'm in this place to be able to offer this service that I so love to do for other people, right? So that resentment piece, although we feel obligated, I mean, gosh, asking to volunteer, asking to donate items to the hockey thing, asking to be the lunch parent, go on this field trip. Oh, do you even love your kids? How come you never sort of go on these things anymore? Okay. Here's what I need to know to be true, right? Is what if I go on this particular field trip, right? Am I going to be there doing it with my whole heart? Can I, like all of those kind of things are such good questions. And the resentment thing always allows me to ask whether I should be there or not. Okay. Number 2, the other thing that not having boundaries does is the exact opposite of what having them does for you. You lose access to empathy. I start to get mad. That's really the connection to resentment, right? Is my ability to have access to the best parts of myself goes away, because number 3 starts to happen a lot. Emotional and physical exhaustion. Because the story in my head is nobody appreciates me. I am here all the time just giving, 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 giving. You see, when I start to serve other people, Laura, I love this question. There is a sense that I lose the best parts of myself. Okay. Now, I want to just speak quite quickly around then not being able to serve other people, because I love this thing. You either are feeling resentful or guilty. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. Because here's the issue. Let me take you back to this thing. Why do you set a boundary? It is for nobody else other than you. And although there are feelings of, I wish I could be more, I wish I could do more, guilt is this indication, right, that you're letting somebody down, right? The most important person I don't want you to let down is you. And it's really about this idea. When I start to learn that this is about me to be able to give the best for you, it is such a practice to be able to switch that narrative of, I can't show up today, but I will be there tomorrow at 5. This is the time that I need to hold special for this, or I need to hold sacred for this. Or when we have these conversations around the kid's dad, this is so critically important to me, how they take on and see this world. So I am just gonna, when those conversations start to happen, we're gonna check out of the room, or we're gonna end the phone call, or we're gonna stop the FaceTime, right? I love when you tell stories to the grandkids about everything else, and they adore you. Okay? We just have very different views on politics, racism, religion. You pick your battle, right? That becomes really interesting. Listen, if you breach those boundaries for yourself, for your children, for the people around you, what happens in those settings, right, is that you start to lose access to empathy. You get resentful of the person. And when we're doing this, this is what happens to our physical bodies, like this. Emotional and physical exhaustion tends to take over right away. Okay. Now, irritability and lack of compassion for the people you love and lead starts to get shitty too. Okay. So if you are a leader, for example, if you're a principal, if you're like, you want to lead the best, you want, this whole notion of leaders eat last, you fucking do everything for your people because you have to show them how to do it. You have to do it all the time, right? For everybody else. I will tell you that if you continue to do things the way that you've always done them, and you are feeling things like resentment, non-empath, you're losing access to empathy, you're irritable, you kind of feel taken advantage of, man, that is a big red flag that this is something you need to take a look at, or you and I need to take a look at, right? If I feel like people are always walking over me, right? What do I want and what do I need in a respectful place to be able to sort of make some question or make some ideas around, boundaries and limits for me. When you get into a place to desperately fit in, be loved, do whatever it takes, right, to stay connected to people, my goodness, it is a lure like no other. It really wants you to be a part of that. And so you will do so many of these things to sort of make sure you stay in this relationship, or that you don't piss people off, or that you don't. Okay, got it. Got all of those things. Knowing when you need them. These are the red flags, okay? Again, resentment, you start to lose access to empathy. You're emotionally and physically exhausted, right? Your irritability, your lack of compassion comes in. Your give a shit is broken. Everything feels futile. What's the fucking point? It doesn't even matter, okay? You're going to do what you're going to do anyway. When you start saying things like that, you feel taken. It doesn't matter how much I give you, you just keep coming back for more, okay? Now, all of those are indications that I want to slow down just a little bit and get back to you, okay? So what do we do about that? Because I can see the desperate questions coming in. Now, this is the critical piece that we're going to spend the most time on, okay? And then we have so many opportunities to jump into questions. But this is the piece that I really want to be clear about. When you start to think about boundaries, set them, keep them, okay? Now, let's back this up real quick. They are the structures or edges you place around your time, emotions, body, mental health to stay resilient, solid, and content with who you are. That's why we're going to set them, okay? They are for you. I want you to have access to the best version of yourself as a mom, a partner, a co-parent, an ex-wife, whatever you are. In a relationship, I want you to have access to the best parts of yourself. This has nothing to do with them. And how they respond to your boundaries will be so much easier when we're clear why we got it, okay? Healthy boundaries are allowing you to have access to the best parts of yourself, okay? So, number one, the most critical prerequisite for boundary setting is timing, okay? Setting a boundary, sometimes this is necessary, but setting a boundary in the moment because somebody's pissed you off, or they've stepped on your lawn, or they didn't respect your time, You said you were going to be here at 6. This is a boundary. You will never see this person again. Yeah. When we set boundaries, when we are emotionally dysregulated, it becomes very difficult to not only honor them, but to know exactly why we're setting them. So let me just give you a quick example of emotional dysregulation. So we noted it from a neurophysiological perspective, right? It's about when your lid is on. Okay, so this is your limbic system. This is your prefrontal cortex. This is your brain. Okay, when your lid is on, this is the hand model of your brain. This is your spinal cord. Your wrist is your brain stem. This is a hand model of your brain. When you have access to everything you've ever learned to be true, when you have set boundaries and you know what you want and you need out of the people in your life and your expectations of things, you've thought about that when your lid is on. Part of the issue when we get emotionally dysregulated, when we go into fight or flight, people piss us off, we flip our lids, which means we lose access to everything we know to be true and why we're doing things and how we're doing things, okay? One of the critical things that I think I want you to remember is being clear about what some of those boundaries are when your lid is on. Okay, if you're having a particularly difficult time setting boundaries with a co-parent, with a mother-in-law, with a colleague at work, spending a little bit of time when you are emotionally regulated, when you have access to empathy, when you are calm, what is it that is about this person, about this relationship, about this experience that is pissing me off, that is making me feel less than, that is, making me feel as though I can't do this part well. And I think the most critical prerequisite is the timing of when you have those conversations with you, right? When your lid is on, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I feel like they're walking over me all the time? Okay. I think I need to take a look at my boundaries of that relationship. Okay. Regulate the emotion, have something to eat, something to drink, write it out if you're a visual person. What is it about this relationship that I need to set some boundaries around so that I don't get the soul sucked from my body every time we are in the same physical premise? Okay. And sometimes in my work with, when I start to talk about people who, oh my goodness, not people, when we start talking about co-parenting, and you've been absolutely destroyed by another human being, right? The infidelity, or you're in a place where you used to be in love with each other, and now you're trying to sort of navigate this baby, and you feel like they are very resentful and awful and unkind. You lose access to all the best parts of yourself. You don't lose who you are, because you're still amazing no matter what, but you lose access to the best parts of yourselves. Boundaries are intended to keep you having access to the best parts of themselves, to the best parts of yourself, even in those moments of distress. This is what I cannot tolerate for me, for my child, whatever that, issue is. So the most critical prerequisite for boundary setting is timing. Okay. I want you to think about some of those things that really sort of gets into place when we're in this spot. You, depending on the age of your children, only have access to you. Boundary setting is so much about you, but when you're responsible for other humans, how you are clear on what you want and hope and wish for them is also then often has to be taken into context with somebody else's hopes and wishes and dreams, particularly if you have joint custody. Okay. What matters most is what you hope, want, and need, and is it allowing you to stay in a place of being the best mom for them, right? When you start setting limits and boundaries as punishments for other people, it becomes difficult, which leads us very, very clearly to number 2. The life you change first is your own, okay? We want so badly. Oh yeah, I did that about this. We want so badly if the intent is to change the behavior of another, boundaries are destined to fail, okay? If the intent, let me say this like for the guys in the back, the people in the back, if the boundaries are intended to change the behavior of another person, they are destined to fail. You want to know what your expectations, what you will tolerate, and why from your mother-in-law. I will not let her come over and tell me how to clean my kitchen. Okay. Why is that important to you? Right? Well, I just feel like such an idiot every time she comes in here and tells me like how to do everything. Okay. So if we're going to set this boundary, let's be really clear on what this is. Okay. Take a deep breath. Let's figure out if we have any access to empathy, right? Why might she be telling you what a disaster your kitchen is all the time? Because she hates me. Because she thinks her son should have married somebody who's better in the kitchen. Because she wishes, okay, what are some other opportunities if I'm regulated? Well, she's always worked so hard at keeping a house. That was always her role, was to be, she's a very traditional woman, very clear about her job to look after her kids and her partner, was to make sure that the meals were cooked and everything is clean. And she did that so beautifully. And that's just not me. Ah, okay. So her perspective, her story is that's really important to her. Yeah. Okay. What's really important to you? Well, like I have a full-time job. She never worked outside the home. We have 3 children. I coach this. I do all these things, blah, 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 blah. This is important to me. If the counters are messy, I don't really give a shit. Okay. So your boundary is really to be able to know that if your countertops are a mess, that's okay. Right? To have empathy for her who says this needs to be cleaned up. You can say, I know, wouldn't that be nice if it was clean all the time? Okay. This is the thing that gets to go sometimes. And I'm glad you're here to help me. Allowing us to stay in that place is such a powerful thing. Okay. So the life you change first is your own. Why do you have a boundary? Why are you holding it? Why do you need it? And is it intended to change the other person's behavior? Are so many questions that are so critically important to ask in this process. Okay. 3. Create a specific plan if a boundary you have decided is non-negotiable is challenged. Okay. So I want you to be clear about some of the boundaries you're going to set with people. Now, for example, if we are, let me just give you some examples. If you start smoking when you are in my house, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you are swearing around my children, we're out. If you make any sexist comments about me, my body, how I show up in the world, we will never speak again. Okay, so part of the question about any of those things is, remember, you get the choice on this, okay? And if I think about the issue for me around, like, let's take one of them, for example, like if you make any sexist comments about how I show up in the world. This is the question that I often have to ask for myself, okay? So where's my access to empathy? What is the story in this situation? What will I tolerate? It is absolutely unacceptable that you speak about women in the presence of me or my children in this way. This is true for me because I know our kids are so, for example, all children are so impressionable. No, they're not impressionable. It's the anemia, impressionable, that I really want our kids to be surrounded by somebody who speaks in healthy ways. And then what happens is when your boundaries get questioned in this way and people say, oh my God, don't be such a fucking, everything's, you got it all right. Let's go, you on your high horse. Okay? In order to create a specific plan around when that boundary starts to happen, when that's non-negotiable, taking into consideration the story, the situation, because we'll jump to number 6 real quick. Different relationships can have different boundaries. You can be very clear that you don't tolerate swearing in your kindergarten classroom, but that at home you are fucking letting her rip. Okay. That when you sit with your grandfather and you can have conversations, he's 96, about how we talk about things, what we say to people, how we navigate things in your relationship, you can have expectations for him that might be different for somebody else in your life. Okay. Being very clear on why you hold those expectations differently for different people is yours to manage. Okay. Not that you're letting certain people get away with certain things, but I want you to know why. Okay. Why, when you set up in certain situations, do you get to be in a place? Because I think sometimes where we really struggle is when we get into this place of being, when we're posting. I was just reading this little piece about like sort of red flags, when it's like we're really not clear on our boundaries, when we're like on a personal attack on somebody else, social media, at a party, right? There's difference between opinions and boundaries. Okay. It's about what you are okay with. All right. I think that the other thing that I really love is that when you start to sort of share personal details with new people in the hopes of like hurrying the friendship along, trying to get them on your side and places like that, I really, I love this sort of take on things about what is your place. Why are you setting this? Why is it important to you to feel this particular way? It will always come back to that renegotiating with yourself. And when you create a specific plan, if a boundary you have decided is non-negotiable, that is non-negotiable, is challenged. What is so critical about this is what are you going to do when somebody is unsafe, when somebody is not doing these things? And I love this idea, boundaries or ultimatums for me is really how they're communicated. And when it turns into you change your behavior or we're gone, is very different than when this behavior happens, I have to step away from me. Is very different than you're drunk again. I'm never coming here ever again. I need you to be sober when when the kids come over to visit. That's the plan. And I'll tell you why if you want to hear about it. Okay. And I think that becomes the issue. So be prepared to execute the plan. So if I think about like, this is the other thing I start to think about a little bit is that like, okay, if I am got it in my head that anybody who makes a racist comment ever in my life, I am going to just snap and this is it. I'm not doing this ever again. I'm pulling my children out of that conversation. Here's what I know to be true about this situation. When I am emotionally regulated and I have empathy for another, this is only your story. Let me just remind you that our own respective triggers will allow us to have different areas of boundaries all day long. Here's my plan when that happens, right? That I'm going to execute this plan, right? I am going to stay as emotionally regulated as I can. I'm going to have access to all the empathy in the world. And here is when I set a limit. Here's who I set a limit with. And these are the times where I don't. These are the times where, and some people have none of those don'ts. Some people do. What serves you the best? And sometimes, of course, there are many non-negotiables. When somebody's getting hurt, when, whatever that is for you, there's no way that you will not act in those situations. It becomes so critically, the self-reflective part, that the life you change first is your own, becomes so critically important. Okay. Now, the other thing that I really want to sort of touch on tonight is the most important person who needs to know about your boundaries is you. And people say, well, nobody knows where the boundaries are unless you tell them. I challenge this so much because I think you have to show people what your boundaries are. I think people who pontificate their boundaries all day long, shout them on social media, say them profusely, profoundly in the places that they need to be said. Again, we all get to do our lives. But what I want most of all is to know where I stand on things. Because if I show up consistently or as consistently as I can in the things and places that I know will serve me best for my mental health, for the relationships that I surround myself with, who I spend time with, who I do those things, who I choose to spend time with, I will be a better human because of it. And I will continue to have access to empathy for the people who I love and I lead and I serve and I walk through communities with. Okay. And I think that you being clear on that is way more important than anybody else being clear. Okay. I hope that that makes a lot of sense, because I think sometimes we have this very clear idea that is, everybody needs to know exactly where we stand on things. Man, I would do much more work if I had a finite period of time, and all of us do, about exactly where we stand today. And you may have had very different boundaries before you had children, before you experienced that trauma, before your father got cancer. All of those things might have been in a place where you didn't hold those things before. And so be clear on why you do now. And I think, again, when we start to ask questions about other people, when we start looking at other people who are, I hear lots of big words: toxic, narcissistic, asshole-ish, all these kind of things. Again, we will always be around people who we disagree with fundamentally, right? Where we, have different approaches to our children, where we have different sort of, ways of operating in this world. Again, I think one of the most critical pieces is what it is for you. Because if we've lost empathy for other people, if the primary way that I describe them is they're toxic and manipulative. Because what matters the most is I'm not going to condone, support, or believe in their behavior. But when I lose access to empathy, I lose access to the best parts of myself. Why is this critically important? Why is this important to me? And how am I going to stand this up? How am I going to uphold this? Your behavior aside. Okay. I wanted to just make one comment before we jump into questions. We have 9 more minutes before we jump into questions about culture and boundaries, because so many times at workplaces, I saw a lot of questions around this place. And I think what's so critically important about culture is this idea of, when you know where your boundaries are at work, culture is defined as the unique sum of your values, traditions, beliefs, interactions, behaviors, and attitudes. And I think that they're the most boundaried relationships at work create the most beautiful cultures, because clear is kind. And for the most part, you have to form it, right? You can't just sort of let these things happen. What you permit, you promote. And I love that statement, because what you allow to have happen at your staff meetings, what you allow to sort of slip by as the joke in the whatever, what you allow, you promote. And there's often a sense of psychological safety. There's often a sense of many people, particularly those who come from trauma or are marginalized, they're watching and listening how we respond to those situations when we're creating the culture. And I often think so much, one of the biggest motivators for me to be able to set a boundary is, would I make the people who matter the most to me proud? Would I make the people who matter the most to me proud? And my kids are watching. I can't tell them how to be anti-racist, how to be kind, how to look after myself. I have to show them. And am I going to fuck it up? Yes. One major aspect around boundaries is this ability to understand that you get to revisit them. You get to have questions. You get to have conversations when they fall apart, when you overstep, when you understep. I think that is one of the most critical pieces around this place, of really being able to understand sort of why you do that, why you have them, and that sometimes when you let them down, it's going to kind of crush your soul. I would much rather feel a bit guilty than I would feel resentful. Resentful for me is a much stronger emotion than guilt. And that's not always true for everybody. I wanted just to show you this piece again. Okay. The healthiness of boundaries, when they are healthfully set, is they are the edges that you put around your time and emotions in your body for you. And when you look after those things, when you uphold those things, you will be the best for other people. You will be able to give away the best to other people, okay? When we are in times of uncertainty, fear, no end in sight, when we are in times of emotional dysregulation and burnout, that is when taking a look at boundaries becomes really critical. And I will give you an example from me. You know, if you're new here, I ended up, I mean, despite the fact that I fucking talk about this stuff all the time, needing a blood transfusion almost 3 weeks ago. And because I wasn't doing a very good job of looking after myself. Now, when you end up in the ER on a Sunday night after a talk in need of a blood transfusion, things kind of come into place really quickly. And this is often where we get a slap in the ass, face. None of those things are appropriate. So like you get Jesus, you get a stark new look at what becomes important and whether you have allowed your boundaries to slip a little bit. And Marty and I were talking about this, you know, it then becomes not a problem to be able to say, no, there'll be no book signing tonight. Jody loves the fact that she gets to spend time with the people who really, you know, want to talk about her book. Honestly, there's no other place I'd rather be, but I will not be able to deliver the talk that you deserve if I'm signing books for an hour before. So everything that is my heart and soul is in that book. And I'm so grateful you're going to give it to your community. And I'm going to stand up on that stage and kill it. I promise you that. It is so much easier to maintain that boundary when I know if I don't, I'll end up back in the hospital. So it's interesting about, you know, these pieces and the idea that clear is kind around so many of these things, I think is really part of the piece that I think becomes really important. Okay. Now, again, remember that these are some of your costs. These are some of the things that are really going to stick out. Resentment, pay attention to those. No access to empathy when you start like wanting to throw punch everybody. When you feel really taken advantage of, I think that is just such a thing. That's not a bad thing. I just want you to notice it. Well, it is not a great thing, but I want you to notice it. And when you start to have a lack of compassion for people and you're desperate just to please them, make sure everything is okay, right? The question for me is, are you okay? Are you okay? What do you want? What do you need? What is okay by you, right? And that is the question that is always best answered, from this state of emotional regulation. When is the timing? When is the timing? And what are we doing for you? When are we setting those limits, and with who are we setting those limits? And the most important person who needs to know those boundaries are you. When that guilt sets in, when it is time to set the boundaries, again, if the guilt is still really strong, I want you to be clear on why. I want you to be clear on why. Because if you're showing your babies how to be anti-racist, not a fucking question in my mind that I'm going to set that boundary. When I know, do I wish I had more time and energy? Absolutely. But I know that if I don't do this for me, I'm not going to be there for anybody else, including the people that matter the most to me. And those are the people that I get to speak to or do things with, right? Guilt is an emotion, right? All of these things are emotions. They won't kill you, but not talking about them might. So really addressing the fact that sometimes, particularly if you've always done everything for everybody, being able to start to make those shifts means there's going to be some of that emotion of guilt. Just notice it and let it come. When we are clear on why we are doing the things that we are doing, I promise you, being able to set these boundaries are a little bit easier. Now, you give yourself grace. Okay, that's how I'm going to end, is that most importantly, I want you to give yourself some grace in this process. Because particularly for women, particularly for people pleasers, particularly for people who just sort of show up and give their whole hearts to other people, that's where they get their identity. This idea of negotiating some of those places to be able to set those limits around some of those things for you should make you feel uncomfortable. That's okay. That's not an indication that it's the wrong thing to do. Okay. I think that's the critical piece. Okay. So there's my summary. I want you to pay close attention to being able to know what's so critically important to you. Where do you function best? Where are your non-negotiables? Where are the things that you know there is just no opportunity to have anything other than a boundary because of the things, the people that matter to you, your body, your physical health, your emotional health, your family. And when you are in this place, then it becomes so critically important to be able to then know when you're going to set a boundary and if you're going to be able to execute those things, right? In any particular setting, right? You matter the most. And how you step out of that after you've set a boundary, right? Although guilt might be something that is present, I want you to know, is it a better choice? And you get to decide this, to feel resentment, like, fuck, I should have said something, to, that was a bit awkward, but I'm so glad I did. Okay. I hope that helps a little bit. And always, here's the issue in 60 minutes, being able to give you everything I know in this moment. And I know it's just a small slice. I hope there's a couple of things there that you'll find really helpful. I'm going to jump into some questions and now. I think that I can see a few. Marty has sent me some, which is fantastic. Now that I got the food out of my teeth, we're really, really, really good about that. Okay, so I'm going to whip through some of these because I love your questions. Thank you so much for them. Tips to maintain emotional regulation when you feel like your boundaries aren't being respected. Okay. The quickest way to stay emotionally regulated when somebody steps over your boundaries is to back it up one more time. Why do you have those boundaries, right? Why are they there? If it's because you feel like the time has come where the racist rhetoric that occurs everywhere in the circles that you go in needs to stop, because you have witnessed the pain, you have hung on to people who you love desperately, and you know that's going to be a problem, it becomes so much easier then to be clear about why this is a place that you need to stay emotionally regulated and act accordingly. Okay? I'm not saying that you won't get upset over things. Seriously, the more ludicrous or the farther somebody crosses a boundary that is very important to you, the more difficult it is to hang on to those emotional regulated pieces. I want to be clear on why I want it. I want to know that if I'm going to step into a situation where I think that, there'll be the big potential for boundaries to being crossed, that I'm doing my very best to look after me, that I got my water, that I'm dropping my shoulders, that I'm not going to tell people how to be amazing. I'm going to show them. Those things often are what helps me to maintain access to the best parts of myself. Okay. Particularly when I know some of my boundaries might be challenged. Okay. Because when I can feel myself getting heated, I need to take a break. Okay. That's for me, not them. Working with kids in mental health, your boundaries are often stepped on. How can they not be? Well, I hope I got that question right. Working with kids in mental health, your boundaries are often stepped on. How? I don't quite get that question. How do you tell your kids about setting boundaries, even for mom and dad? Good question. How do you tell your kids about setting boundaries? I think what's so critically important is that you got to show them, and then you narrate along the way, right? So having clear examples of being able to say, so do you remember when, this is really important that mom and dad get to spend some time together, right? Remember when we did this? Remember when this happened, right? That's important, because if mom and dad aren't okay, we don't show up okay for you guys, right? I think it's like having clear examples of what it looks like to have a boundary or to have a non-negotiable in your world, really then allows kids to sort of settle that in. I see what that means. Okay. How do you make it not feel disrespectful when you try to set your boundaries? Okay. It is not if we're going to do this, it's how. Okay. And so maybe this is the part that I need to say just a little bit more clearly, right? Is that the more emotionally regulated and clear you are in your boundaries, the easier it will be to communicate them. Okay. The more I know to the core of me what I need from other people, what I need from, my time on social media, who I choose to spend my time with outside, your precious time, who you choose to spend time with, in those moments. If you are really clear on who fills your soul and what nurtures you, what makes you feel like sunshine after it, I think that when you set those boundaries, clear is kind. And I think that it's very important to me that I would love to go out. I used to love to go out every Saturday night and drink my face off and dance at the bar and do all of those kind of things. I just got to tell you right now, I got to show up for my kids' soccer the next morning. And that's what's so critically important to me. I hope you guys have so much fun. I just can't do it anymore. So I can't wait to hear all about it. But for me, and maybe if you can't, you don't want to hear about it, don't fucking say that. If you're just like, I hope you guys have such a great time. Thank you for asking me. But tonight I need to be ready to get up and coach that soccer team tomorrow. So thank you. Now, if I said yes, because I didn't want to let them down, I didn't want them to stop asking me, I didn't want to do all those things, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to be like, fuck me. What time is it? Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to be a piece of shit tomorrow with my kids. How much time? Okay, did I do enough? If you're often in this place of like, did I do enough to keep this one happy and this one happy? Oh my God, how exhausting that is. Okay. I think that it does not have to be disrespectful when you are really clear on how you need to communicate that. This just isn't. I know this is probably a really hard conversation to have, but this is, whatever. If I think about some of the times where I've had to really set limits, it's never comfortable. It never just goes like, this is why I've decided to cancel this entire event and you will no longer be welcome here because our ideals do not align anymore. No. I mean, like that's brutal. So is it hard? Is it difficult? Is it sort of when I know why I'm doing something? So for example, if I had to say, I can no longer speak at this event because, some of the things that surround it are not things that I can support. What do you mean? You already signed a contract. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. And I am so sorry that this is a conversation we're needing to have. And I know that there's so many good people involved in this organization, but for me, for this community, for this message, this is where I need to stand today. I would, and I've learned this lesson so many times, much rather have that uncomfortable experience than to be resentful in a situation, to be embarrassed in a situation, to be, why did I show up here? Just to make people happy. I think that's the biggest motivator that I've all learned about these boundaries. And again, let me just be clear that I don't always get it right. The biggest lessons of perhaps when I fucked it up. I think that that is probably the number one for me. Now, I love this other question. How do you make it not feel disrespectful? Oh yeah, we just said that. Okay. How do you decide when a boundary needs to be explained? Okay. You decide when a boundary needs to be explained when any of those things start to happen again and again and again. Okay. You start to feel like you're being taken advantage of when it's not clear about the way that, people are showing up in your life, when, you have left multiple times and people still, you have taken the action to sort of set the boundaries to keep yourself in a healthy place. And somebody continues to sort of impede on those things. Having a conversation in an emotionally regulated place, if at all possible, matters critically. And I think, again, it's that timing of pieces that really matter to me, right? If I'm trying to set listen, you were fucking late again, and you are never doing that to the children again. If you're late, having a conversation when people are regulated, even over email, which I would prefer you do it in person, but relationships are complicated. I would always collect before you direct. And I would say things like, I know this is difficult sometimes to navigate. Our babe between both of our houses. And I know that your life is busy and I know that there's so many things going on for you and for me. And when we missed the pickup time last night by 30 minutes, our son was devastated and there was lots of tears. And I know the transition didn't probably go as well as it could have because he was so scared you weren't going to come. And my hope is that pick up and drop off can be on time. And if there's an issue that happens, I hope we can connect with each other so that our kids know exactly that we're safe, that I'm safe, that you're okay, because they often are worried that we're not when we're not there. So any more than 10 minutes, if that feels fair to you, we'll just head back home. Okay. And however we set that up, I think is really clear. And when we have those conversations matters more than even the content sometimes. Okay. Okay, so here's a list of beautiful questions. How do you set and enforce healthy boundaries with a co-parent who is very controlling? Again, and I know some of these questions came in early, so I'll just reiterate this place around, I want you to be clear what you want for you, and then be as absolutely clear about the time of, when you communicate that. How you show up in a respectful way really, really matters. And then your expectation is that it is also reciprocated. And when that isn't, it is about being clear about, in this regulated place, about why this is important to you, and your child, or your children when they are in, when they are in your care. How do you teach and explain how to set boundaries to a very empathic teenager? Oh my gosh, those are the best kinds. I think you show them, and I think you give examples of what it means to be able to say, no to your friends. Here's the interesting thing, right? About oftentimes we don't know where our boundaries are until we bump up against them. And so many times I want you to consider grace for your teenagers, because you know so much more about friendships and experiences than they do, because they have to go through them. There's no way around them. You have to go through them. And it's so crushing as a parent to watch your children learn how to navigate those things. It is not that they are not going to have those experiences, is what we do with them that matters the most. When they get bullied, when there is an experience of, ostracization or loss or heartbreak or all of those kind of things, bring it home. Tell me more. Let's make a plan. What are we going to do? Right? And oftentimes it's just having somewhere to put that emotion that matters more than anything, right? Giving examples, wondering, not trying to fix, but asking a whole lot more questions around, when does it feel? Where do you feel best around setting the limit with this friend? Really reconnecting the head and the heart with our kids is just such a perfect way to explain, to demonstrate, to get them to feel a sense of boundary. Okay, when you speak your boundary, but others blatantly don't adhere, what phrase would you say so as not to react with anger or annoyance if that's a primary emotion? As in, what is the kind, polite, firm, self-care words, phrases to speak? Of course, repeat, take a breath, walk away, try again. Oh my gosh, look at you answered your own question. Looking for the phrase to say that is not bitchy or giving in and holding resentment, feeling stuck over here. Oh my gosh, I love that. I would consider things like this. I would consider things, when we're like, turning those things back is often an interesting place. Tell me more about that. When somebody makes a statement to see if they're going to piss you off. Oftentimes, some of those things are challenged about, really, are you going to withhold your boundary? What do you mean by that? And I love those questions. Like, so clarify for me how you feel about that, right? Tell me more about that. And it is about, for me, then when it becomes clear that this is something that is not okay for me in this moment, being able to say, just certain things like, just like that, right? This is not the place I want to be for me. And I think about that really differently. So that conversation is probably off limits for you and me right now. And I love so many other things about you, and I would love to talk about anything else other than that in this moment, because I just don't know that we're going to agree. And it is not if, it's how. And I think part of the issue is I've learned so clearly that it is not my job to convince other people about why I have my boundaries or whether they should have different ones. You are much more effective in debunking things like hard and fast rules around, whatever you believe in, marginalization or racism, and, the things that just crush my soul on the daily basis, is we get so much more, we're so much more effective in creating the circles that we want to see when we show people, not tell people. And when it is too draining, this whole idea of just walking away from everything, I don't think is the answer. But I think it's being very clear on how you communicate those things, so that at the end of the day, you have your integrity intact. And I think that's the question for me a lot is, can I walk away with my integrity? Was that a hard conversation? Yeah. Do I feel shitty about this? Yeah. But I wouldn't change it. But I might have said this different or done this different, but really I think being clear on that place. So I hope that helps. I have a teenage daughter with mental health issues. Most times she's emotionally disconnected from me, and sometimes she's disrespectful in how she speaks to me. How do I set a healthy boundary that won't further damage our relationship? Woo! Love that question. Okay. Again, it is not if you're going to have that conversation with her, it's when. Now, we tend to have the conversation when they're being disrespectful. Not helpful. Okay. Because they're losing their ever loving Jesus mind. Their latest slip. So is yours. Oh my goodness. Who are we raising? That is not respectful. You don't speak to me that way. Now, I can tell you every time I've ever set a boundary, recently with my kids, when I'm absolutely overwhelmed or exhausted, my lid is slipped. I know that's not cool, but oftentimes that's where we want to set them. You're being disrespectful. If you're having to tell somebody they're being disrespectful, they fucking know it. The question is, why? Why are they doing it? Yeah. If I were to have empathy for a teenage daughter, it might sound something like this. You are going through a shit ton in your body. Your hormones are raging. You don't know if you're straight or what pronouns you want to use. You don't know who you're attracted to. Nobody seems to like you. You're too fat. You're too skinny. Are you supposed to be doing drugs? I fucking hate everything about you because you think very differently than me, Mom. And school is overwhelming. I don't know if I'm going to get on the sports team. And you want me to what? Make my lunch? I don't think any of those behaviors are okay. I don't think, if children are disrespectful to us, it's okay. It's not if it's okay. It's sort of how we communicate that. And I think sometimes, in the heat of the moment, our biggest job is to get regulated back on track and then have a conversation. Okay. I might say something like, hey, can we have a chat about what happened yesterday? I brought you some water. I brought you a pop. Can we chat about this? I know sometimes we have some pretty big blow-ups and words get said and I say some things and you say some things. And that just really hurts my heart. I just wanted you to know that I don't like those conversations. And I know that I'm not my best self. And I know that you're not your best self either. I wonder if next time that happens, we can take a break before we say those words, before we get that upset with each other, right? And I would really invite her to tell you a little bit about what she wants, what you want, what she wants from you. I often use this line, with kids and even with my own kids. I'm like, you know what? Do you know that I've never been here before? I've never parented a 13-year-old. I am new here. Can you give me some tips? Because apparently things are not going well here. Okay. So I've said that to Livy many times where I'm like, I've never parented a 10-year-old. And she's like, yes, you have. You've parented Asha. I'm like, I've never parented a you who's 10 years old. Okay. I need some tips, right? What is the hardest part about this? And then being able to sort of demonstrate some of those things. Buddy, like when you start to swear at Mom, here's the plan. Okay. I'm going to take a bit of a break. It's not that I don't want to talk to you, and we will come back and sort it out. But in that moment, that's not okay. And when you can have that conversation when people are emotionally regulated, it tends to be better. And then sometimes my children say, well, you can't swear at me either. Touche. Okay. So that's the new plan. We're going to do our very, very best to not say swear words when we get upset with each other. Deal? Deal. And you probably need to have that conversation 150 million fucking times. Okay. Just because you set a boundary with somebody doesn't mean they're going to get it or remember it. Or, I over the years, I find this really interesting where certain people won't have certain conversations if I'm in the room, or they'll start to talk about something and be like, oh, awesome. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for stopping that conversation. I often say that in my head, but I'm like, amazing. That's great. There is some indication that is not something I'm going to tolerate, or that is not something, or, if I hesitate to have a conversation with other people who are in the room, I really got to check myself. do I need to be having a conversation about that? What is that about me? And I think that, oftentimes we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. But I think when it's a non-negotiable, when you're really in this place of being clear about why you show up the way you do, it just gets a little bit easier with time. Okay. I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything else there. Now, I'm an elementary teacher, and every year has become increasingly difficult. The level of expectations by district and or building administrators is unattainable, even with working many extra hours. Our students aren't okay, and we're expected to fix it while still planning, prepping, and teaching rigorous academic lessons. It's a toxic environment and is taking a profound mental and physical toll on me. How do you set boundaries when every aspect of the job is deemed important? Oh my goodness. Okay. I love that question. Now, here's the issue. It is a job. And somebody said this to me, my mentor said this to me at the Children's Hospital, okay? Because again, I was putting kids to bed at 11 o'clock. I was writing reports. I was like, nobody else is going to do it. And I would say to my mentor, often, I would be like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, these kids are here on the unit. I am the psychologist. Nobody else is going to take over for these kids. What's the deal? And part of the conversation is this: if you always take up the slack, there will be no understanding where the boundaries are, right? And I think so much, okay, so that was one thing that I learned a lot, is that like if you continue to do everything, right, then the issue is you pay the price for that. And I know we don't want to put anybody else in harm's way. I know all of those things happen, or very clearly. And I mean, I've been there many, many times, okay? I would suggest that in this moment where we're feeling overwhelmed and toxic and all of those things, so many other people are too, because it rarely is just, one of us floating in one of those issues, systemic kind of a piece that starts to happen. And I would start to think about the 2 places, maybe 3 places where you're going to start to send a little bit of a boundary for you, right? If you can't absolutely change an entire system and you love your job, you need your job, you do all those kind of things, right? It becomes very difficult to walk away, because we have obligations to our students and to, our finances and all those kind of things. Sometimes it's about starting small. What are the couple of things you are going to be able to set and uphold between now and June that will allow you to feel as though you have some control over what this place has been sucking from you? Okay. Things like, you are in your car at 4:30. Regardless of what happens, that needs to go on. I'm just making this up. You can probably yes but me. You're like, I can't, Alana. Okay. So don't set a boundary that is going to be too difficult for you to maintain. But can you reasonably give yourself permission to drive away from that school at 4:30 and go home to the people that matter the most to you and that you will pick up, the next day? Sometimes other things like being able to shut emails down at 5 o'clock, that you don't check the emails until 6 o'clock the next morning, or whatever the deal is, 8 o'clock the next morning. People say, oh my God, I have so many emails in my account. You could only do the best you can with what you got. And I often said that at the Children's Hospital, I can only do the best I can with what I got, and it's got to be enough. Right? And I think sometimes it's not about, we feel this experience of futility because everything feels like it's out of control. I want you to just pick a couple of things where you're going to be able to set those limits around. I need to get my water. I need to be able to go for a run a couple of times a week, move my body, whatever that deal is. I need to be able to make sure, what are we going to do for you to make sure that you are as emotionally regulated as you possibly can be? And I just created a post today for educators actually around this. Here's, the 3 things I want you to consider to do before June. And most of them are, again, about how do we turn internally to look after you? Get a playlist. I want you to feed your soul with some music. How do you start to notice, instead of, focusing so internally, how do we start to wave at everybody? How do we do that one task? How do we find some joy in this situation? Because oftentimes what we lose access to is the best parts of the reason why we're on this planet, right? We lose access to the joy and to the things that are around us. So I think those are really critical. Just start small, but the things that you can uphold. Okay, do that a couple of times next week and see if your soul gets a little bit more back in it. How to remind myself of my worth so that I can set and uphold boundaries. Okay, I love that question too, or I love that piece. Again, your life is the one where we're going to start. Okay. And again, you matter so much to so many. This is what I know to be true. This is the biggest motivator for me. If I am not okay, my kids aren't either. If I am not okay, the people I love aren't either. Marty's not okay. Aaron's not okay. All of those people that really matter the most to me. So if you cannot set a boundary for you, do it for other people. Just joking. But I seriously, sometimes they are my biggest motivator, where I don't want to get into a conversation, or I don't want to call a mom at the end of feeling seen, having a hard conversation with another mom about, whether my kid was an asshole or her kid was. Jesus, I'd rather not have that conversation. Right. But how we do that. And then again, knowing that all of our children are also going to be assholery-ish. How we handle that when other people are attempting to set boundaries about us or expectations of our children, or, those kind of things, right? How we show up for other people is equally as important. When administrators want to have that conversation, or when you're, setting up, again, this piece of emotional regulation, being able to sort of be clear and calm in those conversations, give you access to the best parts of yourself. And so many of us, I think, step into conversations burnt out, feeling underappreciated, being very, 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 very mad at the world. And I want you to take a beat, a time, a moment, a journal, a conversation about why, for now, we're going to switch back to you, why this is so critically important that you set this piece. And I want that to be done from a place of empathy and a place of love. Feels like really fucking cheesy, but I honestly mean it. Like, if I can just wish the best for other people, but here's the plan, man, oh man, don't fucking mess with me, right? And not because I want to be mad at you, or not because I think you're awful. We're all here trying to help kids do the best they can in the school system. I've never met an educator who started out as an asshole, right? When people stop acknowledging each other, we only see the worst parts of each other, right? So slowing down and hanging on to that piece is where we get back to the best parts of ourselves. Okay, let's do one more question here. I love this. Okay, in-laws. Like anything family related is a very sore spot, and I'm not wanting to be the bad guy for saying that I have to draw a line in the sand. How do you do this with grace and diplomacy to someone who's previously taken everything very personally, as very super sensitive? Okay. Again, the time is really important on this. And I would say, when you have a conversation, if that's necessary, if this person is able to have that conversation, how you have that conversation, being able to be in a regulated place and collecting before you direct is always, I think, the number one piece about this. I think that it's never usually one conversation. It is often a succession of conversations where you do your very best to stay regulated in those moments, wonder about things, step into some of those things. I know sometimes when I say this, my intent behind this is this. This is so critically important to me, and I'll tell you why. Sometimes, when I do this work, I see so much pain in this work, and I just feel so protective, and I get really fired up when some of those comments are made, and I'm going to need to step away. And I know we can all have our opinions and our beliefs, and I'm not challenging yours one bit, but here's mine. And so again, it's not if, it's how. And I think really the expectation isn't doing it one time. It is about a slow succession of being able to understand that when you walk away feeling like you've done some little piece to protect the holiness that is in you, that sacred place of where you operate at your best self, that's how you know where your boundaries should be. Okay. Listen, it's already 8:00. My goodness, this was so fun. I want to just check this one more time to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh yes, I'll make you a host. Just a minute, Desi. I wanted to share with you one more thing. This is the ups and downs of ADHD. So the next one is in July. And the ups and downs of ADHD is the next thing we're going to talk about. Again, you're going to get a bit of a feedback form tomorrow. And get your tickets by just getting on that QR code. But I want to just tell you that it's July 10th, so we're going to miss June. because we're on the road a fair bit. But July, again, you get to rewatch all those things. There's been lots of questions about ADHD, and I want to talk a little bit about the whole spectrum. Adult ADHD, kids with ADHD, what it looks like, why there's been so much conversation about it. Why is it now popular? I mean, all of these kind of things. What does it really mean? And I can't wait, because I am a huge fan of, trying to understand sometimes clinical labels that we give big people and little people, and really how to make sure we're doing that in the most respectful way, and really truly what it means and how we cope and all of those things. And so if you're free in July, join us there. And there's a couple of other lists that we have on the webpage about some of the other workshops around this whole piece of mental health that we're coming up to do, because I really love being able to stay in this place where we can make these affordable and we can jump on and have conversations with each other. I really hope that you're finding it useful. And these are some of my favorite parts of every month. So thank you for showing up in such big ways. We can't wait to hear all your feedback in the survey tomorrow. And thank you. It is always such an honor to sit with this community. So take care of each other. Know that the boundaries are for you and nobody else. And I promise you, you and me will be better because of that. Have a good night. Go Oilers.